Hope everybody's doing well today. I want to welcome everybody to the Unimpressed Podcast today. And today we have a special guest on the Unimpressed Podcast, Mr. Ron Daise. Glad Ron came down to talk to us about Gullah and all his, thought processes, his books, information in the books, and kind of diving deep. So welcome, Ron.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
The intelligence behind the language.
Yes.
And how that can be misconstrued, or the narrative of what people think it is.
Yes.
That they put out in the community.
Right.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Gullah Geechee language is a part of Gullah Geechee culture and heritage, which derived from enslaved West Africans who were brought to this country during the 17 and 1800s for the production of cash crops. In this community, primarily rice. And also there was famed Sea Island cotton. The language of Gullah Geechee people began on the slave ships and in the slave prisons, where the enslaved people were populated together, coming from numerous countries, speaking different dialects and languages, and they had to develop a way of communicating that everyone could understand. They were also introduced to the languages of numerous captors, the British, the Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, as well as others. So for years, history books have stated and people have thought that people or Gullah Geechee people speak in this strange way because of low intelligence or thick lips or big tongues, as a way of throwing shade at West African heritage. But it took great skill to develop this speech way so that everyone could communicate, understand one another. And that it has been maintained for centuries. It is still spoken to this day. When the Africans were brought to the Sea Island plantations, which we know spanned from the Carolina and Georgia colonies to date, North Carolina and South Carolina, Georgia and northern Florida. On the Sea Island communities, they were not connected by bridges. They were isolated by the waterways. So sometimes there were hundreds of thousands of Africans to 100 or fewer white people. And that's why to this day in communities like Charleston, Mount Pleasant, Savannah, Georgia, Beaufort County, my home place, Georgetown, there are still older whites who speak Gullah Geechee fluently because they grew up at a time where there was a large West African presence in their communities.
Well, why do you think we don't hear more about it than we do?
Why we don't hear more about it?
More about it. Why is it, embraced the right way? Because when I think about it, when you say it's a combination, when I first came to Charleston, I never heard it before, but my first instinct was French. Right? So I'm not tying it to West Africans. I'm tying it to a French process, thought process. That's just what I picked up on. You know what I'm saying? So,
Gullah Geechee is a creolized language.
Gotcha.
A Creole in the small c. Gullah Geechee is similar to the Creole with a capital C that's spoken in Louisiana, which is a French-based language.
Gotcha.
But Gullah Geechee is an English-based language, and there are also numerous West African root words, expressions that are a part of the speechway. For years, it was considered as bad English, broken English, or substandard English. But it has been discovered that many of the words come from numerous West African languages. And the West African countries from which Gullah Geechee people have hailed include the present-day countries of Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. But not only there, because those were the Rice Coast countries. Africans also were enslaved from the Gold Coast countries, Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, as well as West Central African countries, including Angola, Congo. There are words spoken today that are from those West African speechways, like gumbo. Gumbo, when the Africans in the rice fields, and it was a slippery, slick kind of mud, Africans called it gumbo because it reminded them of the okra from their homelands. And when you think of gumbo, it includes okra and other things that are mixed together. In Ghana, the word bobo means a male child born on a Monday. In the trade language of Sierra Leone, Creole, Krio, bobo means a male child or a boy. So perhaps you may have not heard the word bobo before, but have you heard the word bubba?
Bubba, yeah. Heard that.
Comes from bobo.
Okay.
Those West African languages. Kuda is a West African word. And let's see, do you know what a kuda is? A small animal that got a had back. And it walks slow upon the ground. Now, I double the word, so that means very much so. Not
A small animal with what kind of back?
with a had back.
A head back.
And it walks slow upon the ground.
Gotcha.
What animal am I speaking of? A small animal with a had back.
A head back.
And it walks slow upon the ground.
I have no
A
idea.
turtle.
A turtle. Oh, okay.
Coulda.
Have back. Yeah.
We heard
Got it.
had back.
Gotcha.
And those are some of those expressions hailing from our West African heritage.
Well, that's kind of, that's the differentiation. That's the first I've ever heard that. The Creole so Gullah language would be considered English in the Charleston, in this part of the world, would be considered English Gullah compared to the Creole type language.
English-based Gullah, yes.
Yeah, would be different French-based.
Yes.
In New Orleans.
You got them.
Got it. Got it. All right, cool. Why do you think this originated from West Africa?
Well, when the Europeans came to this area during the 1700s and saw that there was fertile ground for the production of rice, believe it or not, they did not know a thing about rice production. So they went to parts of the world where, such as the rice coast of Africa, where rice had been grown successfully for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. And what did they do? They enslaved those people. They kidnapped them, brought them from their homelands, and enslaved them, worked them. Treated them as though they were inferior to themselves. And that is how rice was grown, that the economy of South Carolina, the Carolina colony, grew to be as prominent as it was. The enslavers, or the plantation owners at that time, they rivaled the royalty of European countries.
Gotcha. So you're at your house hanging out, and you had rice farms, and because these guys show up and they knew they needed people who had this type of talent, they just started
knowledge.
They started snatching people up.
Yes.
And bring them over here to make money.
Right. But not only that, there was enslavement. It brought about a devaluation of the humanity of these people. To think, to have them and to have others believe that they were less than human, so that they could work them and make money, income,
Gotcha.
Because of their labor.
Gotcha. So in actuality, a guy that didn't have the skill and didn't know how to do the skill of rice planting and growing went to somebody that had the skill and then tried to say they had these skills, but they're still not that intelligent.
And that's part of the story that I would like readers to consider, to learn. In one of my most recent books, We Wear the Mask, Unraveled Truths in a Pre-Gullah Community. It is set during the 1800s on a Sea Island cotton plantation on St. Helena Island, South Carolina. Okay. It involves a lot of spirituality because there's the enslaver family, and they are
the McLeods.
The McLeods family. They are William Billy McBride McLeod, his wife Hagatha McLeod, and his niece Belle Rosemarie Hampton. There are also the enslaved family. There's the family of Cuffy and his wife and his older son. Now, Cuffy is a name. It's an African name from the country of Ghana, a Gold Coast country. Cuffy is the name of a male child born on a Friday. And I actually had an uncle, a living uncle, named Cuffy, who had been born on a Friday.
Okay.
Because that's part of the heritage, the culture of West African communities and those of their Gullah Geechee descendants. Not so much today, but giving the names of the day that an individual is born, name of the day of the week. There is also a practice of giving a basket name. You're familiar with baskets, sweetgrass basket, but there was a basket name that would be given that had some connection or it revealed something about what occurred at the time of a child's birth. Mm-hmm. If the mother just before birth had eaten some sweet confection, the basket name could have been Sweet Mouth of the child that was born. And there's the family of the enslaved people, as well as there are these three animals. Mm-hmm. Three animals on this plantation, and they are Juba Bunny Rabbit, there's Sydney Steed, and Celia Mudsnake. Now, in the story, the enslaver family begins to have dreams, nightmares. Each one of them sees one of these three animals. They're horrified because they are these three black animals. Okay. And the families of the enslaved people, they wonder why are they so, they're to learn that they're having these dreams about these animals. There's nothing to fear because dreams mean something. That's part of the spirituality of Gullah Geechee people. And at the end of the story, those animal characters create a whole new story from one that has been told at the beginning of the book. The book begins...
Now let me ask you this.
Sure.
Let me ask you this. When you think about spirituality, right? If these West Africans were very spiritual people, right? And these people who needed this intelligence, this trade, right? Or this ability to make rice. So they bring these spiritual people here. And then here, on this part of the world, there's their own indigenous people.
Yes.
Who are spiritual as well.
Yes.
So you're bringing over spiritual people. There's indigenous spiritual people in this part of the world. And the one kind of in the middle here is the person that's causing all the problem with no spirituality.
Well, we can say there's no spirituality, or there's a different interpretation of that individual's spirituality, or there is a misunderstanding that in whatever way these indigenous people or these African or native people, that there's something wrong with their view of spirituality. We must make them think that the way we think about spirituality is the only true way that it should be considered.
And probably so if they saw strong spirituality from indigenous people here, the West Africans, different types of people that are recognized for this, and they pull their own elements of what they think spirituality is when it's not true to the earth.
Correct.
Right? They can create their own narrative of what it is today.
Correct. True.
Okay. All right. So going back to your book, I'm just kind of...
Well, it begins, once upon a time, before the word Gullah resonated with power, and before understanding prevailed that the African ancestors passed power on to their descendants, Buckras saw an owl during the day. Enslaved Africans eyed a kingfisher pass their way. Animals sensed and resolved problems and made them okay. And the enslaved were expectant that nature would have lots to say. Now, are you familiar with the word Bukra?
Bukra. Now, I think I heard you say that before. Now,
Bukra is a Gullah Geechee expression for a white person. It used to be a white man, but it could be a white man, woman, or a child, a white person.
Yeah.
And there are certain signs if you see certain things, what they're supposed to mean. Seeing an owl during the daytime signifies either a warning of an impending danger, a message about a major transition in your life, or a calling to investigate your intuitive side for answers. To see a kingfisher bird communicates that you should listen to your visions and dreams. It symbolizes that you should overcome your fears of the unknown and plunge into something new. Bakra is the Gullah Geechee expression for a white person, so the enslaved in this story are in tune with their sensibilities and the environment as they survive a danger, while the enslavers are in need of recognizing this ability in order to deal with an impending danger. Having these dreams, these nightmares, what do they mean? Maybe it has something to do with their regard or disregard of spirituality. But both are aware of it and both react differently. And nature, through the animals, we're expectant. Look at what's happening. I believe I intimated earlier at the end of the story, it's the animals who they create a whole new narrative of a story that has been told at the beginning.
Interesting. Now, what you personally, when you're talking about ancestral lineage, how did you and your family deal with ancestral lineage?
How did my family and I...
How did you look at that? How did you view that concept?
Growing up on St. Helena Island, South Carolina, as most of my paternal lineage did. And my mother's family, if I understood correctly, there were relatives who were brought, as the plantation area, from Virginia to St. Helena Island. So as far as I knew, we were all from St. Helena Island. And St. Helena Island was the home of the Penn School, which was the first school, the first school in the South for freed enslaved people, started just a few years before the Civil War began. So there was this sense of pride and heritage for me, being from the Sea Islands. During my youth, words Gullah and Geechee were rarely used. During the 70s, I believe, Gullah was considered those people, the culture thereof, who were descendants of West Africans, but who lived in South Carolina and North Carolina, the Carolina colony. And Geechee was the same demographic, but of those who were descendants of West Africans who lived in Georgia and Florida, the Georgia colony. And no one really, or few people, resonated with pride to the word Gullah or Geechee. Those are fighting words. It was a sense that if those who identified were of low intelligence, they spoke this strange way, and one should speak English as fluently and fluidly as possible. But even as... and that's the way that I thought that I spoke, because my mother was one of the one-room school teachers who had been trained at the Penn School. Both of my parents were graduates of Penn School. There was a certain way that you carried yourself, a certain way that you spoke. There was an understanding that our ancestry was African, but there was little knowledge about what that meant. But when I went to Hampton Institute in Hampton, Virginia, now Hampton University, people heard something different about my speech. As I said, I thought I spoke eloquently, but there was something in my intonation. People would ask, well, you were born here, but your parents weren't. Or your parents were born in this country, but you weren't. Were you? Well, I'm from an island, and I congregated with other islanders from Jamaica, the West Indies. And they would answer, where are you from? St. Thomas, Trinidad, Jamaica. And I would say St. Helena. So they thought I was from some far away island, but I'm from Richa, in South Carolina.
And that is, if people realize that, that's an environmental thing. Because if you take 20 people, right? You put them on an island together, and they lived
Right.
that way for 20 years or however long it was.
Right.
And that's what they hear every day. Mm-hmm. That's how they're going to sound
But
when they're outside of that environment,
yes,
right?
the speech ways, the culture, the spirituality, the belief, the food ways, the other cultural practices of those from these other West African diasporic communities shows the connection of these different cultures. Mm-hmm. We are very much the same people. Our ancestors come from the same homeland.
Having the spirituality and so forth, when you had trauma, to say someone, previous to your life, right, that they say that trauma is carried through each generation.
Oh, yes.
Was something like that recognized?
Oh, yes.
The ancestral trauma?
And still is. But though there are many who don't realize or how deeply it is rooted.
Yeah, interesting. When you think about this, and I don't know if I said this to you when we talked before, is if people realize that skin color was environmental, why do we have all this nonsense? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, I don't think it, why is that not ever discussed?
Right.
Right? When skin color is just environmental.
Yes.
And it makes it very simple.
It should.
Right? It's a very simple discussion at that point.
Yes, but people want to make it very complicated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you said your mother was dialed in, right? Mm-hmm. And what was that like? Did you, if you have a mother that's kind of dialed in to her spirituality and so forth, and maybe did you think that was a normal thing? How did you deal with that with your peers?
Well, my mother was born with a caul. That's the filmy membrane covering the head. And it was believed that those who were born with cauls had special powers. She said that even as a child, the sick were brought to her to be touched or just breathed on because it was thought that healing powers flowed through her veins. And I realized that as an adult, my mother could understand the thoughts of others, even though they may not have expressed those thoughts verbally. Mm-hmm. She could just, and in a sense, I'm able to do so as well. This is a part of the spirituality, the use of the energies with which surround us and which some are able to tap into.
We deal in absolutes, right? Everybody deals in these absolutes. And I always say that you got to look at where the percentages started, mm-hmm. right? So if there was a narrative and percentage 1 started with this narrative, 100 years later, we have 100 percentages. Mm-hmm. Of all these different pieces. So, people look back and they look at this narrative when it started with that very first percentage, right? And they try to claim these narratives as an absolute, but what they're not taking into consideration is from the 1% to the 100%, what's in between. You can't fault the situations in between to press an absolute on them.
Okay.
I have this spiritual thing, and this Hebrew bloodline thing is something I was told that was the bloodline that would protect you from the dark side. And when I get around indigenous people, minorities, whatever, if they are spiritually connected, like my hand starts going off.
Okay.
If you think about that and you think about bringing slaves over and the indigenous people that are here in the salt of the earth type of spirituality, maybe there's a narrative there that kind of, that this person here, this person that may not have this Hebrew bloodline, has been fighting for thousands and thousands of years because these are the people that were the true spiritual people of the earth.
Okay.
That's just a rationale. I mean, I don't know, but I can feel that physically when I get around certain people. What do you think about? Have you ever heard anything like that? You look now, what's going on in the world?
Yeah.
They're trying to eliminate indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like they're trying to eliminate these types of bloodlines for some reason.
Right. And why?
Exactly why?
Why are they doing that?
I mean, I don't know if I'm right or wrong. This is just a rationale that is interesting.
There were many of the Gullah Geechee people, enslaved Africans, who were the ancestors of who are known today as Gullah Geechee people, did intermarry with native groups. And sometimes it was because they were in search of freedom and they caught up, but there was a connection, there was an understanding, there was a developing relationship of shared beliefs. And look at the number of native groups who were forced away from their homelands in the same way as due to development, many Gullah Geechee people who have homelands from the time of the Civil War, acres and acres of land, or land that's near the waterways, because those were needed for day-to-day sustenance, fishing, farming, shrimping, etc. But these developers are removing these people away from this waterfront properties in the same ways as the native people were moved away from these lands, these homelands that were important for the sustenance of their culture. And why? So that money can be amassed, so that more money can be brought in, so that culture would only be identified by those people who would now amass the land.
When you think of the beginning of time, and there's two people that started out, right? Say if they were the Atlanteans or whoever they were, they were around water.
Right.
Maybe that's another, close to source type of scenario, if the spiritual people are along the coast, right? I mean, all these rationales make a lot of sense.
Yes.
You realize that color of your skin was environmental, and you look at where people supposedly started in the world, and you base that. There's going to be a lot of narratives that are out there today that will be debunked if you look at it from the foundation and the truth.
Correct. And it's a matter of who controls the narrative that makes all the importance. I want to read a section from We Wear the Mask, and it deals with Mabel. Mabel is the house servant. Mabel is the wife of Brutus, who is the slave driver. And Brutus has just had an interaction with the MacLeod, Massa MacLeod, as he worked. And Mabel had never seen her husband so stressed before. He would not eat the meal she'd prepared. He would start to talk to her, then stop. Start to pace, then sigh. Start to talk, stop, pace, then sigh. Start to talk, stop, pace, then sigh. Brutus, she urged quietly to steady him. Brutus, wanna have a talk to me? Wanna have a tell me what on her mind? If wanna ain't tell me what I gotta do, me ain't know what for do, and it got kill me. Yeti me? And if I dead, we child get dead too. Don't make me for dead, Brutus. Talk. Open your mouth. Slow now. Talk. When the dam opened, the floodwaters of Brutus's sorrows were unleashed, and the anguish and the hopes of the captured African thousands who had been brought unwillingly to America's shores were left capsized. Veiled untruths were the only things left hovering over the waters, that the Africans had been brought from a worse life to a better, that as slaves, they were treated they were trained in the ways of civilization, that they had been given the opportunity to become Christians in a Christian land instead of remaining heathens in a savage country, that slave owners were kind-hearted and kept their property healthy and contented, and the most ostentatious and seemingly unthinkable masquerade, that slavery was a necessary evil to ensure that enslavers, a more intelligent class, amassed wealth, while the enslaved, an inferior and culture-less people, existed only to labor. In a watershed of tears, the African couple embraced. They invoked the presence of the Spirit of infinite God and the ancestors, and prayed that their unborn child, their slave-row family, they prayed for their strength.
You have two books here.
Two books, yes.
We Wear the Mask.
And Turtle Dove Done Drooped His Wings. A Gullah tale of fight or flight.
Fight or flight is a very interesting term.
you will either fight or flight if something offends you
Yes.
or surprises you. And in this story, it compares and contrasts our human nature through a group of low country birds engaged in a spiritual journey toward creating thrust, that which propels us to a better future built on the legacy of the past. Now, it's a book about these low country birds. They're starting this brand new organization, unlike any organization that has existed before. And I think readers will find similarities if they've been involved in any type of organization or club, at school, at church, in their communities. There are those who act in different dysfunctional ways. And if you're trying to get something started, if you're working on a purpose, it's a matter of fight or flight, whether that purpose will be attained.
When you say a spiritual journey, what was the journey?
The journey was so that they could create thrust. They had to develop a plan so that this organization would be managed correctly, for the benefit of all of the low country birds. Now, there are characters. There's Turtle Dove, and Turtle Dove has a gifting. Turtle Dove can sense, as the birds are in their meeting, Turtle Dove can sense what the other birds are thinking. And he asks questions so that the others can see that sometimes what this bird is thinking and this, they're the very same thing, but they're clawing at each other. Now, is this what you mean? Turtle Dove would ask. And some people, or some of the birds, they have an issue. They think that Turtle Dove, whenever Turtle Dove raises his wing, only to ask a question to make sure that everyone is communicating correctly, saying the very same thing, understanding what the other bird is saying, that Turtle Dove is just trying to cause confusion. So there is all that a stalemate develops with these people, these birds trying to, get Turtle to fly away. But sometimes just staying quiet is the best fight to find out what actually will happen. And they do create thrust at the end. There are chapters. It's an easy read, and every chapter ends, and there was evening and there was morning the first day.
When I said earlier in the conversation that why isn't like this information more present, like current narrative today, very divided to some extent, right? But is the narrative and the information, if they approach the information and the narrative from the foundation of what we're talking about, could the narrative today be tweaked more so people could have a better understanding?
It could. Proud and pleased to say that concerning Gullah Geechee culture and heritage, that was the emphasis for the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission, which is a very unique organization, just like this Audubon Council of Low Country Birds, and it had to develop a way of changing the narrative of the thought of who Gullah Geechee people are and the significance of our heritage. It's a way of, creating thrust, being able to fly. And the story ends, and on a day-to-day basis afterward, after the Audubon rookery has achieved thrust, Barred Owl has watched the unfolding of a vision below the limbs of angel oak and beyond, among poults and parents, mating birds and elder skyhawks, come ya birds, been ya birds, preening peacocks, and nondescript birds from throughout the world. An environment that celebrates the legacy and continuing contributions of low country birds to our American Audubon heritage. Sing hallelujah, Barred Owl hooted, and the responding words of the Low Country spiritual resounded throughout the Audubon rookery. Sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah. sing hallelujah, down in the valley, sing hallelujah.
When I sit here and talk to you, right, and we walk through some of this, you know, if you understand the rationale that we've been talking about on the podcast, you know, it seems like if you look at pop culture narratives, it seems like it's like these buzz words or these buzz situations kind of cover up the pieces.
Yes.
How do we get these pieces out there more, right? With an absolute. That's why I was thinking about understanding where the percentages start instead of going on absolute and you're not defining. I think if you're going on absolute, you need to define the foundation.
You do. And these two books are the beginning of what I call my Geechee literature series, because I remember I had said earlier, Geechee, Gullah were fighting words. During my childhood, few people wanted to be identified as such. And when one thinks of literature, the way that people, or examples of how people live from day to day, Geechee was something you wanted to stay away from. But this attempt of a Geechee literature series is to show Gullah Geechee culture as contemporary. So hopefully people will read them, these books. They will listen to the audio books, and they will then identify with, oh, that is similar to something from my day-to-day experience, something from my family life, and it is significant to me, and therefore I should be promoting it to others, not from a sense of shame, but from a sense of just love and knowledge and awareness of the importance of who I am and who my people are.
Yeah, and I think knowledge is a big term there, right? And I think that if you look at curriculum that they pick and choose,
Yes,
and to put in schools, you know, it's all negative, right? Instead of curriculum in schools about the intelligence of a language that started with the West African people. This is an intelligence thing so they could communicate around these white people who were controlling them, right?
correct.
Why isn't that in the curriculum in schools?
Well, from what I understand from some who have spoken about their opposition to literature or certain types of literature, because it makes their children feel bad. And we can't have anything that makes...
Because you're giving somebody intelligence.
Correct. But your intelligence grows with the full amount of information that you are exposed to, so that you have a choice in what it is that you believe in and a reason for your belief.
Do you think some of these narratives that are supported today, these pop culture narratives that are supported today, are completely opposite than what they really mean?
I do, but there are narratives that some people want to drive so that they can continue with a way of life and a way of thought that promotes them as superior.
Interesting. And you said you do this, your drive is from being intuitive, right?
Yes.
What is that like? What is that experience like when you get these stories? What is that like to you? Is it just like an everyday thing? Is it a certain situation, certain time that you may have this experience where you feel like you got to get this story out? What is that?
Well, I'll begin by saying this. Now, my first job after graduating from college was as a newspaper reporter at the Beaufort Gazette. First African-American newspaper reporter at the Beaufort Gazette. And I began doing feature stories of many people whom I had grown up under on St. Helena Island. When I left the Beaufort Gazette, I continued writing, and my first book, Reminiscences of Sea Island Heritage, was a continuation of these feature stories of the elders, telling about beliefs, customs, old songs. And I've continued with that kind of writing, informative writing, for years. But with the publication of these two books, or the creation of these two books, I began to take all of that factual information and utilizing them in fiction. And it was just an impulse. This is what you need to do. And even though I began writing these stories, and there are characters, or the characters in We Wear the Mask, the names of many of these characters are names of people from my community, St. Helena Island, who are featured in the Face of an Island book that was published in 1970. There were these glass plates that had been found prior to 1970 underneath one of the old buildings at Penn Center, which evolved from Penn School. Many thought these were window panes and were going to discard them, but fortunately someone did some investigating. These were glass negatives. These were photos that had been taken by Richard Lee Minor during the late 1800s and early 1900s, many of which, there's a picture of my mother in the Face of an Island book when she was 9 years old, a student at Penn School, and numerous others whom I grew up under. So I used the names of these real-life characters and the information of historical information, many of which I had gathered or did research on. And as I went through the writing process, these characters began to speak to me, and I allowed them to write the story. If I started this run, at some point, this is not what you need to say. This is what you need to say. Don't say that like this. Say this like this. So that's a part to answer your question, how I allowed that process to happen.
Well, I think it's a combination of things, right? You go through life and you learn all these different rationales, right? And then if you know characters, right, and they fit in a position, right, and then there's a little intuitiveness there, right, then you can put those storylines together a little better, right?
Yes. I've been looking for We Wear the Mask. I had been looking for an old African story, and I found a Wolof story. And Celia Mudsnake, one of the animal characters, she remembers this story that had been told to her by Grandpa Serpent. And she recounts this story. The farmer, the heron, and I forgot the title. But at the end of retelling this story, she realizes people don't know gratitude, she says to herself. And at the end of the story, with the enslaved family having these nightmares, and it's all about these black animals and different things that were going on in their family and different things that were happening in the family of the enslaved people. And it's the animals who understood what was going on with both groups of people. And it's the animals who gathered, and they write a whole new story about what the meaning of what has gone on. And that story, after that retold narrative, written by Juba Bunny Rabbit. And since that day, a long time ago, many have found a new way and want others to know that wherever steeds gallop, snakes writhe, and rabbits hop, a story that makes the ancestors smile can be heard by all who stop to hear it and receive it and not consider it a task to live authentic lives that don't require wearing a mask.
Well, I think you have a plethora of information that a lot of people need to know about, need to hear about. I really do. I mean, there's a lot of simple rationales there in understanding, how these pieces tie together, and one, because like I said, you don't hear all the pieces of the culture and what was going on at the time, and really understanding that. We don't hear all those pieces. So I think these are a lot of integral pieces that should be out there on a national mainstream level, even just, to educate more and more people, because you don't know what you don't know.
You don't.
Right.
For those who feel that they are Gullah Geechee challenged for reading and understanding, though it's written phonetically. We Wear the Mask is available as an audiobook on audible.com, and I am narrating it. Both books are available on amazon.com, and they also are available for autographed copies at my Etsy shop, which is www.etsy.com/shop/Geechee literature.
Yeah, you just recently retired, you said?
Yes, I retired after 18 years of service at Brookgreen Gardens, which is our country's premier sculpture garden located in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina. It was established in 1932 on 4 former rice plantations by the Huntingtons, and because of the heritage on the grounds of these 4 former rice plantations, one of my initiatives that I established was promoting interpretation, particularly of Gullah Geechee heritage, as in the Low Country region of South Carolina.
And then prior to that, you had a little TV series run for how long?
Yes, it wasn't quite little because that was big stuff.
That was a big deal, right?
It was called Gullah Gullah Island. It showed it started in 1994, and it was in production through 1999 on Nick Jr. TV, and it was broadcast internationally.
Wow. So you had a pretty good run with that, huh? That was your family.
Yes.
Right? Nice. Well, I appreciate you coming in, Ron. And if you need to know anything Gullah, Gullah Geechee, any literature and information, I think there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of pieces here that could really solve a lot of questions that are out there today. Mm-hmm. But like I said, appreciate you coming down from Georgetown, and I think we got some good information here.
Well, thank you.
And I think people can listen to this now, or they can listen to this in 10 years and be educated. It's very evergreen. So Thank you, Mr. Ron Daise, and for being on the show. And I'm John Edmonds Cosma, the CEO of Bang Productions. Thank you, man.
Thank you.